The Panthers defense was a disaster in 2024. Can Dan Morgan, Brandt, Tillis, and the rest of the Panthers brass fix the defense in one off season? We'll talk about it right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show here on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council. Why? Because on Fridays throughout the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. So what you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter, X, whatever you want to call it, at Julian Council to get your weekly Friday mailbag questions in for this week's edition on Locked On Panthers. And we are back once again talking about the Carolina Panthers defense as free agency is quickly approaching. Some big news happened on Tuesday. Well, I mean, some semi-big news, not necessarily big news, but Andy Dalton, he's back in Carolina, signed a 2-year, $8 million contract. So check right there as far as who's going to be the backup quarterback in Carolina in 2025. It's going to be Andy Dalton. Once again, the Red Rifle is back to back up Bryce Young. And if he needs to start in any game, we know he's good for at least one really good start on the season. Then after that, you would want to get Bryce Young back out there, but was a pretty integral part in Bryce Young, his resurgence in the second half of the season and learning what it takes to really be a leader within the locker room as the franchise quarterback. So glad to have Andy Dalton back for another season and possibly another 2 seasons, depending on how things play out for him and the Panthers over the next year here in 2025. But focusing in on the defense, which we've done over the last week and a half, looking at the defensive tackles, at the edge rushers, the linebackers, corners, safety, and then talk a little about special teams yesterday. Want to now go back and just look at the overall state of the defense of Carolina heading into free agency in about a couple of weeks' time. We got the combine next week. Then there's 1 week of just nothing happening in the NFL. And then on that Monday, March 10th, we are back, baby. We are talking about team building. We're talking about this team adding some players who can hopefully fix this defense in one off season. And I don't know if it's fair to expect and really to ask Dan Morgan, Brandt, Tillis, Dave Canales, and everyone in that Panthers front office and coaching staff to fix this defense in one off season. Because largely when you look at it, like the talent level was not there to have a top half defense this past season. And then when you add in, you had starters missing combined 69 games, including Derek Brown missing 16, Shaq Thompson missing 13. That's not going to lead to success either. And yeah, the numbers, we all know what they were at this point in time. The Panthers allowed an NFL record, and I still cannot believe this happened, 534 points. Now, not every single one of those points was on the defense. There was a pick six in there. There was a fumble, a block punt, and all that return. But still, the worst scoring defense in the history of the NFL, and asterisk, all the things I just said. Plus, they played 17 games. Totally understand that. 3,057 yards rushing allowed this past year. Yikes, 3,820 yards allowed through the air. So the defense was bad. They were 31st in defensive EPA, 32nd in defensive DVOA. And despite all of that, Ejiro Evero is coming back for a third season as the Carolina Panthers DC. And we talked about this last month, early on in January after the season when Dave Canales made it known that, yes, Ejiro is coming back for another year. I had told y'all even prior to that, that from the people I talked to, it was leaning in that direction that he would be back and that they would make some staff changes, which they have done. And I don't necessarily believe they've gone out there and hired all the guys to replace the people that they fired this offseason, but still changes had to be made as far as the coaching staff and as far as personnel as well. And those personnel changes are coming up in a couple of weeks' time. And man, there are needs across the board defensively. There's not just one area you can point to and say, yeah, they're good there. Maybe linebacker when you got Trevor Wallace coming back for his second season, going to be the full-time starter there, likely wearing the green dot. Josey Jewell coming back once again. You could possibly point to linebacker and say that's the one area where they don't need to go out and find necessarily an impact player. They could do it. I don't think they shouldn't do it necessarily, but they probably are fine as long as Josey Jewell can stay healthy and play the way he played after that first injury early on in the season, starting Denver week and then moving for the next couple weeks until he had a season-ending injury. And in the way Trevor Wallace performed at points of times, the flashes that he showed, if those two guys can stay healthy and then you bring in some quality depth there at linebacker, okay, sure, you can talk me into that being the one position group heading into this free agency period in the NFL draft where you don't necessarily need to go out there and bring in somebody to come in and be a starter. But everywhere else, yeah, there are big-time questions. Defensive tackle, we already know Derrick Brown's going to be back this upcoming season, and that will be in the Panthers' mind like a free agent addition as one of the top defensive tackles in the NFL is back after missing the majority of the season with a torn meniscus suffered in week 1 on the road against New Orleans. So that's obviously a coup for Carolina to get him back. He's also someone they've signed long-term to be one of the faces of the franchise and to be a building block on this defense, in particular, the interior of the defensive line, which was horrible this past season. Everyone outside of Ashawn Robinson and still looking at PFF, it wasn't like he was graded out as one of the top half interior defensive linemen in the NFL in 2024, but you can work with him. And Shy Tuttle, he can't be back in a starting role. Can he come back as a backup and be experienced depth? Absolutely. I'm cool with that. I do think that makes the Panthers defensive line better, but they got to go out there and spend the money or go sign someone or draft someone rather in the NFL draft coming up in April. Like I would think what would make the most sense is to sign somebody. I mean, we got BJ Hill. That would make sense. We got Javon Hargrave. That would make sense for Carolina. There are a litany of options out there in the defensive tackle market that you can throw some good cash at to fix that problem. And we saw a year ago, the offensive line was a massive issue for Carolina, mainly because 7 different left guards, 8 different right guards. Icky regress in part because, hi, my name's Icky. Who the hell are you playing left guard today? Like they had a lot of issues on the offensive line, mainly due to injuries. And you could even argue that the defensive line issues were in part and maybe a large part due to the fact that Derrick Brown was injured. The run defense, combining Derrick Brown's injury with Shaq Thompson, your best 2 run stoppers weren't out there this past season. So no wonder you gave up 3,057 yards, but also you should never give up that many yardage on the ground as the Carolina Panthers defense, knowing what this franchise has been about. And I got some numbers, by the way, about the rushing defense. We're going to talk about a little bit later on here on the show. So yes, you can tell me that may have been the biggest issue is Derrick Brown being out, but still talent level was not there. You get Derrick Brown back, you bring back Ashawn Robinson, you either cut or reduce the role for Shy Tuttle and have him as depth, and then you bring in a Javon Hargrave. You bring in a BJ Hill, a Poona Ford, somebody in the interior to elevate that room and get you in a position to where you can stop the run, you can control the line of scrimmage. And if you can't do that, as we saw at the offensive side of the ball before, when the Panthers have been able to stay healthy on the offensive line, have been able to protect the quarterback, run the ball, they have had success. The years where they have had injuries and have not been able to do that, they have failed. And this past season certainly wasn't great to start off as far as the record, but down the stretch, they started winning games in large part because of the quarterback. But he had time and the running game next to him to help him out this past season. So, yes, they fixed the offensive line last year by throwing a bunch of money in the interior at Damian Lewis and also at Robert Hunt. I don't know if they can do that this year. And right now, don't really have the cap space to do that currently. And there will be some moves I expect that they'll make over the next coming days, weeks, months, not really months, it's the next coming weeks that they'll be able to make to open up some space, but still defensive line like that, clearly that D tackle position in the interior, they got to upgrade their edge rusher. Okay. Like we talked about this, Clowney, Wonnum on the surface. When you look back at everything, they kind of lived up to what the Panthers asked them to do this past season. If you thought Jadeveon Clowney was coming in and having close to double-digit sacks, that's on you because that's not who this guy is or really ever has been in the NFL. Wonnum certainly showed the kind of numbers that make you think, had he not missed 9 games, that possibly he would have had a bigger impact in Carolina this past season and can have you encouraged moving forward. Still needs to be healthy, and the blood clot, like, obviously that's like a freak thing, not something that you can expect to happen again. Hopefully it never happens again. And I'm certainly sensitive to what he had to go through with that situation. When he came in, he was impressive, and Clowney was fine. But I don't look at either DJ Wonnum or this late stage Jadeveon Clowney in seeing an elite pass rusher, see a difference maker on the edge. Like, they need one. They didn't want to pay Brian Burns. Okay, that's their prerogative, and that left them a massive hole at edge rusher. Was not filled last year and currently is still unfilled. Hassan Reddick, he's no longer here as well. That's something that they cannot ignore this offseason. I do not think that they will ignore corner. It could be pretty simple. Re-sign JC, re-sign Mike Jackson, maybe draft someone else. I've also seen a couple of mock drafts suggesting Carolina will do that at 57th overall there in the second round. Wouldn't bother me if they decide to do that. I don't think that's an area that is that concerning. It's just about, are you going to pay JC? Or are you going to play the same game you play with Brian Burns? Are you going to pay Mike Jackson, or do you think you can do better and upgrade there? Safety, plenty to figure out there, as 5 of the safeties on this team this past season are all free agents, and the one that's coming back is a second-year undrafted free agent who did earn that starting job over Jordan Fuller to close out the season in Damani Richardson. But Xavier Woods, does he come back to Carolina, or are they done with him? Jordan Fuller, probably not going to happen. Nick Scott, if it happens, it's in a backup role. Same thing for Sam Franklin Jr., Lonnie Johnson Jr. Both of those guys will be core special teamers once again if they come back, so they don't really factor into the whole safety group. And was reading ESPN looking at the top 50 free agents and some of the fits to teams. Trevon Moehrig, who we talked about, who's been with the Raiders, he's someone that would fit this system, according to Matt Bowen of ESPN and according to Mike Kay and according to your boy Julian Council. So that seems like something they should do. Go sign someone, have Damani Richardson back there, maybe draft someone else, maybe bring back Xavier Woods. There are needs everywhere. So when you think about that, it's going to be pretty hard for this to be a quick fix. And the offense, like the offensive line, like that's one area of the offense that was fixed. And it's one of those things, like, all was the rising tides, like, can lift all ships or whatever the saying is. When the offensive line is good, that helps the quarterback, that helps the run game, that helps the receivers. If the defensive line is good, that helps the linebackers stay clean, be able to fill the gaps whenever necessary. That helps the corners as they're not put on an island. It lifts all ships, okay? You understand what I'm trying to say here? So if you fix the defensive line, which in my opinion, that is the edge rush as well, you invest in defensive tackle, you invest in the edge rush, and that should lift up the entirety of the defense and not necessarily fix it in one offseason. As we saw with the offense, still had a lot of issues for a large portion of the season. But once Bryce had it click and figured it out, they were a lot better, and they ended on a high note. That's what I would like to see from this defense upcoming season. They may not be the best defense in the world coming out. They probably won't even be a top half defense at all in 2025, just looking at what they may or may not do. But if they can show you what the offense kind of showed you in the second half of the year and adds like they did offensively last year in the offseason, that can get this team to be competitive, with the thought that Bryce Young is going to take another step. But the offense will also be solid in the offensive line, that you'll see the growth, and that they'll also add some other pieces. And in this division, that may be enough. So is it asking too much for Dan Morgan, Brandt, Tillis, Dave Canales, and the rest of the Panthers brass to fix this defense in one off season? Maybe, but maybe not. If you look at fix the defensive line, get an edge rush, and that should help out your linebackers and your secondary. And what do you know? You're not the worst defense in the history of the National Football League. Now, there are 3 big questions I have pertaining to this defense heading into free agency. What are those? Well, I'll tell you in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you're ever going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy, all so you can get the most money back, guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Three big questions for the Carolina Panthers defense heading into free agency in a couple of weeks' time. And certainly there are more than three questions that need to be answered this offseason about this defense, but three that I'm really looking at as Panthers prepare to try to revamp, retool, rebuild, whatever reword you want to say. They got to get this thing right in 2025. And Dave told us last year, get the football right. That was his focus. Now, offensively, yeah, they're on track to doing that. Defensively, no, not even close. But hopefully they will be getting back Derek Brown, having Jaycee Horn around, and then adding a pass rush, adding to the defensive line, and probably bringing back some other people there in a secondary, signing some good players, and then we can see what they can do. And speaking of Jaycee Horn, brings me up to the number one question. Will the Panthers fool around, or will they sign Jaycee Horn to an extension this offseason? Dan Morgan and the Panthers made a calculated risk last year, exercising the fifth-year option on Jaycee Horn, which he's set to play on in 2025. That's $12.472 million. And if they had not done that and had Jaycee, which he did, go out there and play a career-high 15 games and also earn Pro Bowl honors, they will be looking at a $20.357 million franchise tag until they were able to sign him to a new deal by the middle of July this summer in 2025. But that's not the problem. They already got it figured out as far as if they don't sign him right now, it's $12.4 million to JC, fully guaranteed. It's a $12.4 million cap hit as well. Good job by everyone involved to go with JC and to invest in him and to believe in him. But now Jaycee Horn can come back and say, yeah, I may have missed 29 of my first 51 games. I came out here and I played basically a full season, and you have to wonder, had the Panthers been in contention of anything, would he have played the last couple of weeks of the season? The world may never know. Not really important, but 15 out of 17 games, you'll take that, especially when it comes to Jaycee Horn. As long as he's not missing a significant amount of time and playing the vast majority of the season, which that would be, you should be happy, especially when he's playing at a Pro Bowl level, something that we all believed he could do. He just had to be available, which he was this past year. Looking at his market value on Spot Track to place for contracts, 4 years, $78.5 million, average salary of 19.6. He's getting more than that. Looking at the top 5 contracts among corners, looking at average annual value, Jalen Ramsey, 24.1. Pat Surtain, who just signed one last year, $24 million. Jair Alexander from Charlotte, North Carolina, $21 million. AJ Terrell, $20.25 million. Denzel Ward, $20.1. I'm thinking JC is getting more than AJ Terrell. I don't think he's getting necessarily Pat Surtain numbers. It's possible, but 22, $23 million per year, wouldn't be shocked if that's what he's asking for Carolina. And honestly, that's what he should be asking for. And if he asks for that, will the Panthers fool around and do him like they did Brian Burns, a guy who has done all the right things, played well when he's been healthy, shown he can be healthy, and helped your team win some games? We'll see. I think they should go ahead and get that done. Don't mess around and have this be a conversation this time next year in 2026. Number 2, will the Panthers bring in edge help? You look at it, they're 29th in sacks with 32 this past season. That was better than the year prior where they were dead last, only 27. They were last in pressure rate at 15.2. And looking at Pro Football Reference, Daniel Jeremiah, this past Tuesday, he mocked the Panthers in his mock draft 2.0, taking Jalen Walker, the linebacker edge rusher out of the University of Georgia, 8th overall. And I have seen a lot of people either mocking Jalen Walker or mocking Mykel Williams, both of those edge rushers out of UGA to come up to Carolina and to help out. Now, Walker's pretty slight of frame, and he's going to have to add some weight there if he's going to come to Carolina and be that edge rushers. That's one thing. And the run stopping, that would be a concern as well. But either way, what you're focused on is, can you get someone to put pressure on the passer? Because the last guy you drafted to do that, DJ Johnson, can't. He's incapable. Ain't gonna happen. Great job, Ajero Avero and Scott Fitterer, for bringing in this dude who cannot play. But he's here for another year, it looks like, unless they bring in better players and tell him to hit the brick. So we'll see what happens, but they got to bring edge help. Clowney played in 14 games last year. You'll certainly take that at a 70.8 PFF grade. That is solid. 44 pressures, 5.5 sacks, 46 tackles, 9 tackles for loss. Like, those are good numbers. But when you're paying him the kind of money the Panthers are paying him, you might think that that's going to equate to a double-digit sack season. But there's a reason why there's a lot of escalators in that contract. They didn't believe he was going to hit that. If he wanted to make the maximum $24 million, he was going to have to earn it on the field, which didn't do, which is okay because he helped on the run defense and he was overall a solid player, just not a difference maker when it comes to rushing the passer. DJ Wonnum, again, mentioned that missed 9 games, played in those 8 games, finished out the season, 26 pressures, 4 sacks. Pretty good in half of the season, and now had been right on line with what he did a year ago in Minnesota, where he had 8 sacks, has done that twice in his career. Someone that I do think, with a full offseason healthy in this scheme and a full season healthy coming up in 2025, can really help out Carolina as a secondary pass rusher, whether he's the number 2 or number 3. It doesn't really matter. You want a guy like DJ Wonnum, certainly, on your team, but you need to get someone who's truly a difference maker. And I don't see one right now. It's never going to be Johnson. It's never been Clowney. And I think it's a lot to ask at a DJ Wonnum, who is certainly an upgrade over what you had before in Marquise Haynes and even Yetur Gross-Matos, if you want to lump him in there as well. But he ain't Brian Burns. He's not a top guy. They got to find a way. And maybe it's trading for Myles Garrett. If that works out, I'm certainly not opposed and wondering if Myles Garrett would want to do that. And, of course, the Browns, whose cap situation is hellish, if they can even afford to do that as well. Number 3, and this is not necessarily a question about free agency. It kind of is, but will the Panthers be able to stop the run in 2025? I am sick and damn tired of watching these dudes get run all over every single year. You look back at the last couple of seasons. Last year, well, they gave up 3,000 yards rushing. 3,057 yards rushing. That was dead last in the NFL. 2023, it was better. They were still 23rd. 2022, 2021, they were 18th both those seasons. And in 2020, they were 20th. 2019, 29th. So looking at the Panthers, since they went to that predominantly 3-man front, 29th, 20th, 18th, 23rd, 32nd in the bottom half of the league every single year against the run. So is it the scheme? Is it the players? I don't know. Kind of pointing to a lot of the scheme, since David Tepper said, in Pittsburgh, we run a 3-4. So, Ron, you're going to call the defense and we're going to run a 3-4. And, well, even with those vets like McCoy, like Bruce Irvin, couldn't stop the run. And by the way, Luke Kuechly was still playing for the Carolina Panthers back in 2019 when they were 29th. The last time the Panthers were in the top 10 at stopping the run, not just the top 10, but the top 5, was 2017. Coincidentally, that was the last time the Carolina Panthers went to the playoffs. So maybe, just maybe, if they can control the line of scrimmage, stop the run, they could be a playoff team. Just saying, because 18th is the best it's been since 2019 when they've gone to that predominantly odd man front, and they almost made the playoffs. Remember that game down in Tampa where they were up 14-0 and then blew it? They had a chance there. So that's got to improve. 2018, they were 12th. That was the last year of a 4-man front. And, of course, 2017, they were 3rd. They were top 10 in 2016, top 10 in 2015, of course, where they were also 3rd. So 3 straight years they were ranked in the top 10 against the run. 2 of those years, they went to the playoffs. 1 year was certainly disappointing there, sandwich in between in 2016. But really since then, this has not been a good run defense, especially since they've gone to a 3-4. So will they be able to stop the run? That would require them to add players on a defensive front who can do it. And Derek Brown coming back helps. And also, I don't know, maybe get better on linebacker, more experience should certainly help. A guy like Charlie Wallace being healthier should help. Josey Jewell, I don't think that's a position group they should just say, no, we're good, and then move on. So that's where I stand as far as some three big questions heading into free agency period coming up here. And 3 weeks now for the Carolina Panthers and the rest of the NFL. Let's take a quick pause. We'll come back and guess we'll talk about my feelings about this defense, which you've already heard for the most part, just as far as like what to expect so far heading into 2025 as we head into free agency in a couple weeks' time here in just a moment on Locked On Panthers. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth-quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers, and that could be you, get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for a shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. I did this with offense when checking out the Carolina Panthers and the state of the Panthers offense heading into free agency. And I suppose I'll do this now with the Panthers defense as far as just early expectations for this defense heading to 2025. And it's kind of hard to do because this was the worst defense in the NFL, the worst defense in the Panthers' 30-season history, and they have not had an opportunity to add players. Now, they have signed guys to reserve/futures contracts, but yeah, those guys are probably not going to make a difference. Now, Boogie Basham, that's one guy who did grade out pretty highly, and he's coming back. So maybe he's one, just not to put my foot in it. So possibly he's somebody who can help out. But the guys that they're actually expecting to come in and make a real impact, well, they're going to come in a couple of weeks' time once free agency rolls around. Then, of course, in 2 months' time, the NFL draft. So looking at just current expectations, like defensive line, they're going to be better. With Derek Brown coming back, he makes that unit so much better in itself. I think with him and Ashawn Robinson, you got a good foundation. It's just throwing someone else in there as well who can be a frontline starter and really help elevate that. And I would love to see a guy like Javon Hargrave, especially looking at how Ashawn Robinson was able to rush the passer last year, having a career high with 5.5 sacks. Hargrave has been an excellent interior rusher, whether it's been in Philadelphia, and we all saw that a couple years ago in Carolina, and then his short time there in San Francisco. I would be all in favor of doing that. You could try to get somebody like BJ Hill to be more of a run stopper in the interior to help out Derek Brown as well. I just think that you add in a veteran piece there who's been on contenders. I think that dramatically changes with the reinsertion of Derek Brown, what this defensive line, really the interior defensive line, can look like in 2025. Like edge rusher, if they draft somebody, I don't know how high expectations you can truly have because it just takes time for a lot of these guys. Maybe, and this is my hope is that this team can have, if they're going to go by the draft, they need to have the draft the Rams had this past year where they got Jared Verse in the first round. And Jared Verse, I loved him at Florida State those 2 years. A dude who started out at Albany and then transferred down to Tallahassee and was a stud. Could have been a first-round pick 2 years ago. He decided to go back again to Florida State and help them there in that 13-0 season before they got screwed by the committee. But that's a dude that you want to get someone like Jared Verse. I can't necessarily say that Michael Williams or Jalen Walker or any of these edge rushers, or other than, of course, Abdul Carter, who won't be there at 8th, could be that. Like if Carter was going to be available at 8th, then there's your Jared Verse. I don't know if they're going to get that kind of guy, but I would love for them to be able to get a Jared Verse kind of edge rusher for them in this draft class in the first round. Then in the second round, remember the Rams traded up to Carolina in the second round to be able to get Braden Fisk. Get your Braden Fisk. Like I would love to see that happen on the defensive line. 2 guys that were immediate difference makers. Then later on in day 2, they got Cam Kitchens, the safety out of Miami. The Panthers need a safety. They need a defensive tackle. They need an edge rusher. If they could have that kind of draft and have guys come in and make that kind of impact, I would be elated. I just don't know if that's going to happen. Like, of course, we don't know it's going to happen. You can hope and wish that it's going to happen, and it's may very well. But they may not wait until the draft to try to address some of these situations like defensive tackle, which I think that they should try to address during free agency. And linebacker, probably looking at it, looking for more depth guys. It's possible they bring back Shaq, but considering the turf injury and also all the concerns he's had about the artificial surface at Bank America Stadium, maybe not coming back to play on that yet again, has other relationships across the NFL. They could go maybe team back up with Brandon Bean up in Buffalo. I don't know what their situation is linebacker wise. Milano has been excellent for them. He's also been banged up. So maybe they want another banged up linebacker. I don't know. But like corner could be very simple. You have Jaycee's me back. That's one area you're not concerned about. Mike Jackson, we got Shaw Smith-Wade coming in, and I don't think corner is going to be the biggest concern for Carolina. Now, safety, it's just going to come down to who do you sign. They're going to have to get a veteran, I would think. And we talk about Morey, we talked about Javon Holland, some other guys out there like that. That could obviously make sense for Carolina. There's just so much that they have to do. Where like offensively, you got your quarterback. You have your offensive line. You may have to figure out certain things like who's going to play center and who's going to be if the Moton situation was cap hit, of course, but overall, like offensive line wise, you're not super concerned about that. You have your running back, you have receivers, probably need to add somebody there. Tight end, you have JT Sanders, certainly need to add to the tight end spot, but you can check boxes where defensive line wise, you can't check a box defensive tackle wise. You can't check a box on the edge. You can't check a box at corner fully. You can't check a box at safety and linebacker. Maybe you got that box checked, but there's a lot of things that must be done to improve this Panthers defense this offseason. But truly, to me, D-lines win. And if you can fix the defensive line, you can find an edge rush there at that outside linebacker rush spot in this defense. That will make this defense so much better and take pressure off the linebackers, take pressure off the secondary, and have them not be a complete and utter and total embarrassment like they were in 2024, upcoming here in 2025. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter at Julian Council, where on Friday, I'm back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council to get those questions into me right now. In the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole as always. Keep pounding it in. On Thursday, we're no longer looking ahead to the offseason as far as what the Panthers should do. Maybe we're going to look at some players who could be cap casualties, look at some other players across the league who have been, if they could be a fit in Carolina, and then some other news that maybe happens in between now and then. But I'll talk to y'all on Thursday.